Well, greetings once again. This is another in the series of In Conversation with the CLA President. And today we are heading for South Africa and a past president of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, none other than Mohamed Husain. Greetings, Mohamed.
Greetings, Brian. Good to be with you.
Well, it's great to see you. I suppose we have to start off, Mohamed, asking how are things with you and your family and your work, given the pandemic that has been visited upon the planet?
Well, we're into 75 days of a national lockdown, Brian. It started off towards the end of March. We're into some easing of restrictions at the moment, but it's really, I suppose, like all people and colleagues around the world, having to adapt to working in this environment with all of these restrictions. So it took some additional knowledge, and on my part, having to get into the digital age. I mean, I did some of it, but not as much as the youngsters in the office.
Yes.
So it's been conferences on Zoom and Teams and WebEx and the like. But other than that, I think that we're coping quite well. Thank you.
Yes, we've all really accelerated our IT capabilities in a very short space of time, haven't we?
Absolutely.
Well, doesn't it let you see that you're sitting there, I'm sitting at home in Belfast, and we are able to do this? It's, I mean, for older lawyers, Mohamed, it's still fairly amazing that we can do this.
Absolutely. We are having trials conducted digitally wherever possible. And I must say that's been a bit difficult because you're now having to adapt to a completely new way of working. And it's been somewhat difficult in the case of some judges and also counsel. When you're so used to having files and wads of paper in front of you, and to move to a fully digital environment has been a bit of a challenge.
Yes. I mean, other colleagues have observed that online courts work pretty well for reviews or mentions or case management or small discrete applications, but less so if there's people required and evidence to be taken. I don't know whether there's been any concerns of that sort expressed where you are or more generally in South Africa.
No, I agree with it entirely. It's the same here as well. Wherever one's required to take evidence and the question of witnesses' demeanor and composure and all of that becomes important, somehow it's just not the same doing it digitally as compared to everyone being in the same room. I think the whole courtroom atmosphere is quite important for trials, and especially in complex matters. And one tends to not have that when you are doing things digitally. So our appeal court is in fact conducting appeals where, of course, the hearings are primarily based on paper.
Yes.
And then case management meetings, pre-trial conferences with judges and the like, those are quite easily conducted digitally. As you say, arbitrations and trials where oral evidence has to be given, a bit more difficult. And I've had at least 3 matters which would ordinarily have taken up 6 weeks of court days or arbitration days having to be postponed because the parties simply could not wrap their heads around doing this digitally.
Yes. Do you think that creates a pent-up demand once the lockdown eases, that cases that haven't advanced in the last, well, in your case, 75 days, they still need to be advanced or resolved one way or another? So do you think there is going to be pressure on the system and on legal colleagues to, if you like, get the work done that hasn't been able to have been completed?
Yes, definitely. The courts have started entertaining cases under very strict conditions, but there's no doubt that this will create a backlog.
Yeah, well, I think it's the a question of managing that. More generally, I mean, we pick up a little bit on news and on websites about how the government, all governments across the Commonwealth have been performing. Can you give an insight into some of the challenges or concerns that maybe have affected South Africa in your view?
Sure. Brian, the South African government reacted very quickly to the pandemic, and in fact has been praised by the World Health Organization and a number of other governments around the world for its very quick response and a very serious response. The lockdown was very severe. We've moved to some restrictions, but in its original form, incredibly severe. And the government got together a team of experts. We have some renowned experts here recognized internationally, and they've been advising government on the approach.
Yes.
The government declared a national state of disaster in terms of our Disaster Management Act, and the president heads cabinet ministers who've comprised the National Coronavirus Command Council. And they've been issuing regulations. So the particular ministers in charge of particular areas have been issuing regulations within their remit. And a lot of work's been done. The president has been applauded for taking matters in hand very quickly and also keeping the populace informed of regulations. Of course, this is an unprecedented experience, and it's caught, I think, the entire world napping. On our side, after the initial constitution of this council and regulations, one started seeing some fault lines appearing. The first of which, very sadly, was the deployment of the Defence Force to assist the police in monitoring and implementing the lockdown. Unfortunately, there was an instance of a young father having been killed after being assaulted by the Defence Force.
Yes.
In fact, as we speak, there is an application for review in the course of being launched against a report by the Defence Force exonerating the soldiers involved. And a number of witnesses have come forward talking about abuses of power, abuses of violence, abuse of their rights and violence. The Defence Force is there only to support the police. And it seems as if initially they misunderstood their role to be the primary enforcers, or at least co-enforcers with the police, which has created difficulties in various areas. So that has been a very serious problem.
Yes, there is this question of balance between an emergency, unprecedented, as you say, and yet people's individual liberties, because I must say that liberties have been impacted very significantly in terms of exiting your house and accessing your business, and of course not being able to conduct your business. And I'm sure that's the same with you. Those businesses that create gatherings of people simply have been not able to operate at great financial consequence to them.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the numbers of poor, I think, are going to increase exponentially. Unfortunately, we have one of the largest disparities between the haves and the have-nots in the country as compared to most parts of the world. And this is simply going to deepen those fault lines. So the government has announced huge bailout plans and to assist struggling businesses. They've made monies available to unemployed persons. They've made funds available to small, medium enterprises. Of course, it takes time to get down to the relevant people.
Yes.
But all in all, I think that we're facing a world like we haven't faced before. and all of the comparisons with the Great Depression and the like, I think, are all tried across the world. For us, having had an economy that was struggling in any event, and then to have the overlay of COVID and the exacerbation of that, is an enormously serious problem. And I think that we're going to have many, many years of trying to reverse this impact. And I think it's going to be a huge challenge.
What about
It also talks about, potential social unrest because of these disparities and the economic impact of the pandemic.
And how has, in terms of our sector, Mohamed, the legal sector, been able to respond? I mean, certainly I'm concerned about young lawyers completing their training, about the capacity for employment of young colleagues recently qualified. I mean, I'm sure those are not unique to my jurisdiction, but what's your assessment of the impact on the legal fraternity?
The impact is serious, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our practitioners have small practices and largely single person practices. And within a few weeks of our entering lockdown, they already indicated that their work almost dried up.
Yes.
The very small practitioners, you can imagine, a lot of them would deal with walk-in clients. A lot of them would deal with small applications in magistrates' courts, regional courts, and the like. And that would be getting clients on an ad hoc basis. Unlike the more established firms that would have their corporate clients and repeat clients. So a lot of the smaller practices have already indicated that they simply aren't able to pay their overheads, to keep employees. In fact, I learned recently that one of the larger firms has had to cull their candidate attorneys, the number that they have. That's a serious problem. So I think the impact is far-reaching and is going to be enduring.
Yes, there's also the question that if technology is being used for court applications that previously would have been made in person, I mean, you can't just assume that every attorney has the necessary technology or can afford the internet connection. And I know that some law societies are thinking in terms of providing a centralized place where attorneys can go and there would be the available technology. This feeds in, Mohamed, to our next conference, which we very much hope will take place in September of 2021 on the subject of sustainable justice and the future of the law. And I wondered, did you have any reflections on sustainability of the law in our current context?
Well, I think that the first point, which I think is an immediate one, is a lot of these practices are not going to survive. And so the question of sustainability for them takes on a very real impact. Many of them, unfortunately, will not be around by the time we have our conference. For those that can adapt and will still be around, I think we all have to adapt to what we're all calling a new normal. I think that this pandemic has certainly created, I think it's galvanized people into thinking about a new world.
Yes.
The indications appear to be that the virus spread from pangolins in a meat market. That for South Africa is a major issue because we're losing a lot of our wildlife to poaching and to a lot of the endangered species being sent along to parts of Asia and Southeast Asia. And so just the question of sustainability of natural resources is going to be a key issue.
Yes.
Lawyers are going to have to play a role in dealing with that. For the first time in decades, the lockdown has resulted in a clean environment. And so I think from that perspective, our air is cleaner, the roads are clearer.
Yes.
And so it might indicate a completely new level of living for the sustainability of this planet. And I think lawyers are going to be central in having to work out the necessary legislative framework for going forward and for playing an advocacy role together with NGOs, with citizens at large, and with government.
Yes, I mean, these elements are all very much to the fore in our planning, and in that theme, there are the environmental law aspects, and the fundamental sustainability of, as you say, of species and of the planet. There's the right to an atmosphere almost that we have rediscovered whenever the planes aren't flying, and one can hear the bird song again because there's no cars on the street. So, but fundamentally, yes, the law can only be sustained if economically there's legal business to do, and it can be done in a viable way to maintain the sort of overheads that we all need. So we're looking forward to seeking your assistance, Mohamed, as plans for the conference and speakers are identified. You should look out for our first draft of the profile of the streams of the conference, and we very much hope that you would be able to attend as one of our leaders of the CLA and a past president. And I bring you greetings from the present council. In fact, I was on a Zoom discussion with Ron Heinrich earlier, and he passes on his very best regards because I mentioned we would be speaking. So look, we've got a short time to have this conversation. Maybe a few closing remarks, and we'll wrap this up, Mohamed.
Thank you. Brian, the CLA, as you know, is very close to my heart. I've been involved with the CLA since 1997-98, served as its vice president and president, organized a conference in South Africa. I think, as you are no doubt aware, the CLA is a unique organization. It deals with the lawyers from the 54 Commonwealth countries. We have these common bonds of being part of the Commonwealth, 1, and 2, having the common law as the basis of our legal system. But I think importantly, as compared to other international legal organizations, we're able to interact with other Commonwealth bodies, with sister organizations within the Commonwealth Secretariat, the Commonwealth Human Rights Institute, a number of these Commonwealth bodies. We have in the past, and I must assume continue to be involved in discussions with the senior officers and law ministers.
Yes.
And I remember, I think it was 2006 or thereabouts, that the CLA presented, and as part of that presentation, the Edinburgh Plan of Action, yes, around the Latimer House guidelines, to the solemn conference, senior officers and law ministers in Edinburgh. We have the unique opportunity of engaging with CHOGM, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. And that sets this organization apart. And I think our activities are underpinned by our commitment to the rule of law. So that makes this organization particularly special. And I would urge everyone to get involved with the CLA. And Brian, you've done a great deal. Well done to you, and congratulations over the last few years in increasing the profile of the CLA. And I'm sure we're going to have the good benefit and privilege of seeing you do much more and leading us to a very successful conference. But yes, just to repeat that I think we need the involvement of all lawyers now more than ever. The topic is one of great moment, and I'm pretty sure, like every other conference the CLA has had, this will be incredibly successful, and we'll move ahead under your leadership and that of your executive.
Well,
I wish you well.
Thank you, Mohamed. We must not overlook the great work that Santan did in terms of his astonishing presidency, outreaching not quite all, but most of the 54 countries. There were 53 then, but yes, it's astonishing. And he of course remains a great supporter and a great friend. And in concluding, of course, friendship ought not to be overlooked, and the collegiality of the CLA. And it's not what you get out of it, it's really what you put into it. And these qualities, I think you recognize very well in terms of being a staunch supporter of and an advocate for the CLA. Mohamed, it's been lovely to talk to you, albeit briefly. Good to see you looking so well. And I hope that as lockdown eases, you will get back into practice and will provide the leadership for your own local legal community that you have previously provided to the CLA. So it's been lovely to speak to you today, and thank you for taking part in this interview.
My pleasure, Brian. Thank you very much, and greetings to all colleagues everywhere across the world.
Well, it's been lovely to see you. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Bye.